Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we are going to share werewolf horror stories. First story: the woods behind my house. Lately I've found myself wondering what lurks in the woods behind my house. We recently moved into a beautiful home surrounded by a wooded area. The perfect place for our perfect family. Most recently, it has only been myself and our child at home, as my husband travels across the country for work. We have two large picture windows in our living room that just seem to encase the woods perfectly. I've found myself drawing the blinds more and more because while I'm staring out the window, I don't want to think of what could be staring in. As I was getting ready for bed, I realized I had forgotten to take pictures of our backyard for the new landscaper who was scheduled to arrive early the next morning. I grudgingly put my shoes on, cursing myself for not doing this in the daylight hours. I opened the curtains a crack and gazed out into the large backyard. I told myself not to let my mind wander. I'd just take the pictures and be done with it. I took a deep breath and opened the back door. I was met with nothing but the wind and the sound of crickets chirping. Feeling my nerves settle a little, I stepped into the yard and started taking my pictures. I had the sound off on my phone so the camera made no noise. I was ready to finish up, just a couple of pictures left, when I heard a rustle come from the tree line. I tried to put it out of my head and finish so I could get back inside to the safety of my home. I turned to walk the several steps back to my back door and heard a low growl. That was all it took for me to hit a full sprint. All I could think about was getting back inside. I had to get back inside. I made it to the door and went to slam it behind me, but something was pushing on the other side of the door. Growling, desperately scratching and pushing, trying to get into my home. I was no match strength-wise for whatever this beast was. No matter how hard I tried, the beast shoved the door in and sent me to the floor. I immediately curled into a ball trying to protect myself, and whatever this thing was immediately started attacking me. Claws and teeth dug into my flesh. I wanted to scream out so badly, but I knew no one would hear me. All I could think about was letting it finish with me and be on its way. After all, I had a baby sleeping in the other room. The beast mutilated every inch of my body. I didn't understand how I was possibly still alive. I could feel myself slipping further and further away every time my heart beat. The beast stood up on its hind legs. The only way I can describe it is something like an emaciated werewolf. It was missing patches of hair all over its body, and it smelled like rotting flesh. He stood over me, and it almost seemed like he was admiring his work. The beast turned toward the back door to leave, and at that very moment I heard a faint cry from the other room. My 1-year-old. I begged with everything left in me for him to turn around and walk out the door. The beast gave what sounded like a slight chuckle and headed for my baby's room. That's when I lost consciousness. The next day, I woke up in a hospital room surrounded by doctors who explained to me that I had undergone an extensive surgery to repair my injuries, and my husband had been contacted and was on his way home. When my husband arrived at the hospital, the police came in and explained to us that they were still searching for whoever did this to me and my baby. But I knew they would never find my sweet boy. My husband and I packed up what was left our lives and moved to a small condo in the middle of town. I no longer find myself wondering what was lurking in the woods behind my house. I found out the hard way. Second story. My grandfather had the worst job in human history. We used to have to take the corpses out with canes, he told me one time, because they were so intertwined. Entire pyramids of bodies, people climbing on top of one another, clawing each other to get away from the gas. They used to tell us it was a quick death, but everyone knew it wasn't. The screaming in the chamber would go on for 15 or 20 minutes. They used to put a little glass window in the doors so the doctors could look in and watch. My grandfather, Alexander, had told me about his time in the Sonderkommando, the corpse units of the National Socialist concentration camps. He had been arrested in Poland simply because he had been a leader in his field and an intellectual with a history of supporting Polish nationalism. This had raised red flags, and during a roundup of the intelligentsia, my grandfather had also been arrested and tortured by the Gestapo. They had made him sign something he never got to read, and then he had been moved to the prison and, eventually, to his new job. The day it happened, he said, my friend Bartek and I were on duty. Our job was to lead the people towards the chambers without alerting them or causing a riot. The Sonderkommando all used lines like, "Don't forget where you put your clothes, because you'll need to come back to them," or "Tie your shoes together for convenience to make it easier to find them when you come back." We always emphasized how they would come back after their shower, but I never looked them in the eyes when I said it. He stared out the window for a long moment at this, his mug of coffee steaming in front of him. I knew not to interrupt him. He often talked to me about his experiences. It seemed like he wanted to draw poison out of his memories, and letting him talk seemed to help him do it. So the chamber was packed. As always, he said, 800 people smashed into a tiny area, like sardines. To get the last ones in, the SS would often beat and bludgeon people. The claustrophobia must have been horrifying. The lack of air, the packed chamber like a massive coffin. By the time they slammed the door closed, there wasn't an extra inch of space into the entire chamber. In fact, after they opened the door, their bodies would often still be standing, because there was simply no room for them to fall down. Except for the middle of the chamber, of course. There, people lived longest, and they tried to escape from the gas. We would see infants and small children at the bottom of the human pyramid, smothered and stampeded. The stronger ones would be at the top, having climbed over the bodies of others to try to get some air at the top of the chamber. The gas did have a tendency to fall, depending on the temperature and humidity. When they opened the doors, Bartek and I walked in along with the other Sonderkommando. We used long canes to pull the bodies apart. At first, a Sonderkommando would treat the bodies with respect, but after tens of thousands of bodies, you just started throwing them like bags of potatoes. It was our job, after all. He said this with an ironic misery, his eyes misty. Bartek and I would then pile the bodies on carts to be brought to other teams of Sonderkommando. One team, which we called the dentists, would rip the gold teeth out so they could melt it down into bars and send it back to Germany. Another would shave all the remaining hair off the corpses. They had shaved them when they first got there, but any remainder would make the crematoria reek of burning hair. Bartek and I were moving our carts of corpses up the lift elevators when a commotion suddenly broke out in the nearby medical barracks. They called it a medical barracks, but in reality, it was mostly a place where doctors experimented on people and where the sick were often given lethal doses of phenol intravenously. This also wasn't a quick death, as the person would begin to get agonizing cramps and a burning sensation before devolving into unconsciousness. I had no idea what was going on. At first, I thought the SS were trying to prevent a prisoner escape, or perhaps someone had already escaped and they were in an uproar. It looked like someone had kicked a hornet's nest. I saw government vehicles speeding in with fully armed troops. The guards surrounded the gates of the camp, a thick ring of black-suited soldiers. I saw a doctor running out of the barracks with blood covering his white lab coat. His eyes looked wild, and he screamed something in German to the soldiers. He kept screaming it over and over. "Die Wolfen, die Wolfen," he said. Most of the Sonderkommando, including myself, knew at least some German. It was, after all, the administrative language of the National Socialist state, and the Germans never deigned to speak to us in our own languages, unless they were torturing us or trying to get information. By this time, Bartek and I had paused, a cart full of emaciated, naked corpses lying in front of each of us. The doctor ran past us, not noticing us, his eyes wild. He continued to scream gibberish in German, speaking so fast I could barely understand anything except two words, the girl and the wolf. What in the hell do you think this is about? Bartek asked me, his blue eyes wide and uncertain. I just shook my head, feeling numb. I hadn't felt much of anything in months, to be honest. I had closed myself down emotionally, psychologically removed myself from the present. I saw much of this as if it were happening to someone else. It was my mind, I think, trying to protect me. Even now, looking back, I feel like I'm telling someone else's story sometimes. A torrent of gunfire erupted from the medical barracks, and then a woman ran out, a nurse. Her face looked like a mask of gore. One eye hung limply from its socket, and her entire left cheek hung down, a flap of skin revealing the teeth beyond, like some sort of grotesque half-smile. In her remaining eye, I saw mortal terror and fear. Seeing it coming from our captors loosened something inside of me. Bartek felt the same way. We left our carts of dead and turned to run. At that moment, something tore its way out of the barracks. As I saw what it was, I began running with all the energy that my starving body could provide. It was a girl, or at least it had been. She looked no older than 12 or 13, and she wore a striped uniform soaked in blood. Her arms and legs lengthened before my eyes, forming long claws that erupted from her fingers. Her mouth had formed into a strange rictus grin, with drops of blood falling from her sharpening teeth. Stringy black hair seemed to grow from her head, and her eyes turned yellow, with slitted, demonic pupils gleaming in the center, emanating a bloodlust and fury I had never seen before. The SS guards and soldiers had streamed in the front gates by this point, running at her and shouting orders. Automatic rifles began to fire, and Bartek grabbed my hand and pulled me down to the ground just in time. I heard bullets whizzing over my head, smashing into the crematoria's chimneys and the surrounding barracks. I knew they weren't shooting at me, but so many soldiers had opened fire that the entire area had turned into a shooting gallery. I looked back and saw bullets ripping into the girl's body. Gore blossomed from her chest, blood and flesh exploding out of the exit wounds, covering the bare dirt around her. With a roar, she jumped on top of the barracks, leaping 20 feet in the air. To my amazement, I watched the wounds healing before my eyes. I wondered what kind of strange medical experiment this was that could produce such an effect. Bartek shook me, telling me, "We have to run, we have to get out." But I just stayed there, shell-shocked. He slapped me, pulling me up and towards the gas chamber. "We can barricade ourselves inside the chamber," he said. I gasped. "I'm not going to lock myself in there," I shouted, waves of anxiety rising in my chest. I had images of the door slamming closed and Zyklon being poured through the vents. I shuddered, but we kept running towards it, not knowing where else to go. As we got inside the crematoria, the window smashed inwards, and I saw the girl had followed us. She had completely transformed by this point. Her skin looked yellow and papery against her long, wolfish frame. Tatters of the blood-stained uniform still clung to her body. I saw no marks from where the bullets had struck her. She ran forwards at us, lashing out with a clawed hand. Bartek pushed me just in time, and I fell, the claw missing my face by a fraction of an inch. I began to crawl away, looking back as Bartek began to cry out in terror. I looked and saw him backing away from her, his hands raised, pleading. "I don't want to die. I don't want to die," he kept saying. In a blur, She leaped forward, ripping at his throat, the bloody rictus grin still plastered across her face. A torrent of blood rushed out from the gaping wound, soaking the front of his body. She opened her mouth wide and drank the spouting arterial stream, sucking at it as she held up his body with her clawed hands. When she was done, she threw it aside and looked down at me. I had begun to rise, to jump up and begin to run when she tackled me from behind. I felt a searing pain in my back as her claw connected, leaving deep gouges. I felt something sticky and warm flowing down my back, soaking into the rips in my uniform. At that moment, a dozen SS men ran in the front door and began shooting. I was on the floor after she clawed me, which turned out to be lucky, as the bullets went over me, hissing and spitting blood. I turned my head at the last moment to see the girl galloping away from me on all fours, her freakishly long arms giving her a loping stride. She jumped back through the shattered window she had come in. The SS men all ran out after her, and I found myself alone with Bartek's body. I got up and found the rest of the prisoners confined to their barracks with armed guards watching each of the groups. The guards had left the front of the camp in a hurry, and I saw the gates stood wide open. With blood pouring down my back, I began to creep through the shadows of the camp, checking the watchtowers and the front gates for people. They had all joined in the pursuit or were with the confined prisoners in their barracks, and they had apparently forgotten about a lone Sonderkommando like myself. I finally made my way outside. I didn't see a single other prisoner or guard in the front. But when I looked back, before I left for the final time, I saw the girl leaping over the razor wire fence as countless soldiers pursued her. Good for you, I said to myself. Good for you. Third story. One of us is the werewolf. I always had an overactive imagination. And yeah, I could get over emotional. Not to mention I was always fucking weird. So I guess I couldn't blame the people of Stanwyck, Georgia, when they didn't believe a werewolf killed my family. No, not many people believed me. Ashley Nelson, the quiet geek, a tall, fit black girl. Even then, I was lonely and constantly alienated by my classmates. My long wavy black hair and big brown eyes always besieged by restless mannerisms. Regardless of my quirky fashion and cute glasses, I had a social anxiety I could never harness, a low self-esteem I constantly struggled with, and a quick temper I constantly suppressed. But on that awful April night, my issues were overshadowed by tragedy. At 16, what little innocence I had was forever shattered. The police came to my house around midnight, way too late to save my parents or younger brother Chris from the monster, and way too late to save me from the paralyzing trauma. Our house was a mess, a crime scene closer to a slasher movie than anything resembling real life. Blood and flesh were our new wallpaper, severed limbs and scattered organs our new furniture. This was a redecoration job sculpted by slaughter, and I was the sole survivor, found cowering alone in my room, covered in blood with a few cuts.
No bruises.
No serious injuries. And yet the police didn't believe my story. Hardly anyone believed me when I said a werewolf killed my family. But ultimately, I wasn't charged for the massacre. Instead, I was set free to the wild, free to an unforgiving public. After the summer, my senior year crawled by. Now living with my grandparents, I really had no one to turn to. Not my parents, not Chris. I was alone and against the world. Even Grandma and Granddaddy never talked to me. Like prison guards, they just kept watch over me behind suspicious glares. Then again, so did all of Stanwyck High. I was the girl who literally cried wolf. Now I was even more hated by my classmates, even more ostracized. And needless to say, my teachers and counselors were less than supportive. In the span of a few months, I'd gone from being ignored to outright despised. From alienated Ashley to the wolf girl. Anonymous internet death threats became normal, as did all those dirty looks in public. I was constantly called wolf bitch by Carol Lane and her preppy best friends. I guess I should have been glad I was never charged. There was no evidence against me. I talked to the cops. I told them what happened. How I could do nothing but run to my bedroom. That by the time the werewolf ripped open Chris's innards, my parents were long dead, and I could do nothing. I couldn't help it if I was lucky enough to survive. While I escaped the lycanthrope, I couldn't escape the suspicion. I heard everyone's excuses, everyone's theories. I heard them whispered behind closed doors, shouted on TV, or in all caps on Reddit. All the stories that I was a crazy geek who enjoyed horror movies a little too much. Nobody believed me except my boyfriend Patrick. He was soulful and introspective. With messy brown hair and bright green eyes, Patrick was cute but quirky. The same height as me at 5 feet 8 inches and a total weirdo as well. Even so skinny, he still had a nice body. And to top it off, Patrick loved writing scary stories. I guess our shared creativity helped fuel our passionate relationship, not to mention our shared love of horror. Patrick had actually been at my house before I saw the werewolf. He left before nightfall, before the monster left my family in pieces. And like me, Patrick had been questioned by the police, and also suspected by almost everyone here in Stanwyck. The constant hatred made Patrick and I feel like outlaws at 17. But we did the best we could. And through it all, I loved Patrick and always depended on him. Especially since he was the only person who believed me. Patrick was my therapy. And of course, the sex was passionate. Patrick made sure of that. But through all the negativity, we had each other. And that was all I needed. By the middle of September, Patrick and I were surviving the torturous prison sentence that was senior year. We were doing okay, until Carol Lane got a hold of us. Right after third block, she stopped us during our march to the library. "Hey, Ashley," Carol's playful southern accent yelled. Helpless, Patrick and I stopped right outside the library, cornered by Carol. Under the dim lighting, we knew no one would be near the library or its long untouched books to help us. Like a gang leader, Carol led her army toward us. All of them were dressed in uniform. All of them in tight name-brand ripped jeans and even tighter name-brand shirts. There was Carol Lane in all her blonde-haired, blue-eyed Southern belle glory. Carol the future prom queen, future valedictorian, and current bitch. Her boyfriend Roy nothing more than an eye-candy distraction. He was a dumber and taller version of Carol, complete with big muscles, curly blonde hair, and flawless skin. Just the type of meathead dunce Carol would likely dump after graduation for smarter, hotter men. Behind the couple lurked their hangers-on, Frank, Jean, and Becky. Frank and Jean were the B-list couple to Stanwyck high royalty like Carol and Roy. Yeah, they were attractive, but not quite as hot or rich as their idols. Frank was pale with dark hair, social but too corny and silly to be funny. Jean was a light-skinned black girl with big glasses, strong-willed with a long, lean figure. And then there was Becky. I figured she was the ugly one of the bunch. But then again, with her long, coiffed black hair, I guess she was kinda cute behind the extra pounds and thick makeup. Probably could have been much prettier if her self-esteem or fame from being Carol's childhood friend would allow it. Or if Becky wasn't such a grade-A cunt. "We just wanted to invite y'all to my party," Carol told us. She exchanged smiles with Roy. "Just a little get-together at my house." "Yeah, it'll be fun," Becky chimed in, excitement in her squeaky voice. Carol shined her glowing blue eyes toward me. "We'd like to get to know you more, Ashley." Showing remorse, she paused. A fresh start. Nervous, I looked at Patrick. I like to think I wasn't starstruck by these assholes, but I was. I couldn't say a word. Couldn't tell Carol and her cronies what a pack of assholes they'd been, nor could I tell them to fuck off. Instead, my mind went blank. Honestly, I'd always had a hard time standing up for myself, much less when I was being confronted by Stanwick High royalty. Patrick just flashed me a confident grin, totally unfazed by the cool kids. "Maybe we should go," he said. He helped me shake off the silence. "I don't know," I said. I faced Carol. "It's at your house?" "Yeah," Carol answered with equal parts friendliness and exuberance. "It'll be chill, I promise." I hesitated. "I don't know." I could feel the clique's collective pretty eyes beaming on me like spotlights. "Just let me think about it." With a delicate but persuasive touch, Patrick squeezed my hand. "Nah, we'll go." Struggling to suppress my anxiety, I glared at Patrick, but his confident smile, his sheer handsomeness crushed my anger. Carol and her gang lit up with smiles of perfect white teeth. "Good," Carol said. "Be at my house around 5. Still conflicted, I confronted Carol. "That's kinda early, isn't it?" I asked. "Not really," she replied. Carol glanced at her comrades for the support she could always count on. "That's what time we usually start." "Yeah, that gives us more time to party," Jean added. "FO show." I heard Becky squeal. To my dismay, Patrick didn't fight back. "Well, we'll be there," he said. My self-conscious insecurities kept me from groaning right there on the spot. Not only was I a prisoner at Stanwick High, now I'd be trapped at Carol's house on a Friday night. Before I could persuade Patrick, Carol rode her gang off into the sunset. Back to the wilderness of our high school cafeteria. "We'll see y'all there," Carol yelled toward us. For emphasis, Roy let out a playful howl. A call of the idiots. "Patrick, what the hell was that?" I muttered, annoyed. Patrick smiled at me, his cuteness a temporary remedy for my dread. "What?" he said. "It's just a party, babe." "A party from hell," I grumbled. Patrick's left hand caressed my face. "Look, we'll have fun, all right?" I got lost in his green eyes. Yet another cure for my constant worry. "And if it sucks, we'll just leave early," Patrick continued. I guess he had a point. From what I'd heard, Carol had a Lake Douglas mansion, an isolated fortress by the water. And she also had a shitload of Jose Cuervo. At the very least, Patrick and I could attend for the booze, and hopefully get too fucked up to have to deal with any of Carol's bullshit. So I let Patrick drive us over there. His car was easily the ugliest one in the long paved driveway, but we didn't care. By now, both Patrick's chill mood and our little pre-gaming helped me relax. Walking hand in hand, Patrick led me up to Carol's garage door, right past all the lovely cars and cute lawn ornaments. Like a South Georgia Hollywood, Lake Douglas had hills, privacy, and a variety of million-dollar views. And Carol's two-story house was no exception to the neighborhood's luxurious standards. Inside, I was surprised by the low-key party. Not that it was lame or lacking. It was just more chill than I expected. Instead of sorority-like antics or frat house theatrics, all of us just sat in the living room's many recliners and sofas. Just me, Patrick, Carol, and the rest of her tight-knit clique. The 5 of them still wore their expensive uniforms while Patrick and I rocked our colorful thrift shop finds. My Caribbean blouse a stark contrast to their pretty blandness. On the huge flat screen, top 40 music videos played at a low volume. In the corner, a small bar featured Carol's notorious treasure chest of alcohol. A hallway connected the living room to all the bedrooms. Small town ornaments gave the house a wholesome charm, while large picture frames showed off photos of Carol and her eternally on vacation parents. The frames represented a sprawling chronology of Carol Lane from innocent baby to conceited teenager. The booze was potent, strong, and absolutely fucking amazing. This wasn't PBR or Natty Light. You got what you paid for here at Lake Douglas. Throughout the party, everyone stayed in their zones. Outside of pedestrian conversations, no one amongst us outcasts and preps dared cross over to the other side. Not that I minded. As the hours went by, Patrick and I were having fun just chillin' and listening to music. Around 7, I stole a glance out a window. The sun was beginning to fade, and once darkness hit, I suspected Carol's calm garden party would turn into a rowdy nightclub. When I was eager to escape, Carol stood up and muted the flat screen. All eyes went to her as she placed her humongous purse on top of the TV. Like she was ready to deliver a toast, Carol held up her red plastic cup. "I'm glad everyone could make it tonight." She displayed a wicked smile. "We have quite the special event in store." Confused, I faced Patrick. "Special event?" I asked, my voice louder due to the booze. Cackling, Roy pointed at us. "It's just for you, Ashley. Just for Ashley." Jean shouted with drunken enthusiasm. The anxiety roared through me, even through the liquor. "Patrick, what are they talking about?" Patrick's hand caressed my arm, but not even that could soothe my swirling unease. "It's okay, babe," he said. Carol motioned toward the windows. "Becky, close the blinds." At Carol's command, Becky lowered all the heavy blinds, squashing the stray sunlight. A few ceiling lights were now our only solace in this upper-class cavern. Awkward, I looked all around us. Carol's gang now gathered by the TV. "I don't understand," I said. I looked at Patrick's calm face. "What's going on?" His grip tightened around my arm. "Babe, just relax."
No.
I pulled away from him and confronted the preps. "What the hell is this?" "We're trying to help you, Ashley," Carol said in a moderate but authoritative tone. Roy pulled Carol in toward him. "Yeah, we gotta catch a werewolf." Like a laugh track, all their friends forced a chuckle. I placed my cup on the floor and stood up, my mind somewhere between outraged and intrigued. "Is this a fucking joke?" I asked. My voice came off weak. I was nothing more than an intimidated mess. Sensing my unease, Patrick grabbed my hand. "Babe, they're serious." "What?" Patrick stood next to me. "I already talked to them, Ash. They want to help, that's all they want to do." He leaned in closer. "I know you weren't lying, babe. I always knew, and now we're gonna prove it." Carol strutted up to us. "At first, I didn't believe you." She stopped right in front of me, her poise the polar opposite of my defensive demeanor. "But then I figured it out." "We all did," Jean added. "So you've seen him?" I asked, excited. I stole a look at the lineup of cool kids. For once, even Roy was serious. "Y'all really believe me?" "Yep," Becky retorted. "We know the truth, Ashley," Carol said. "A werewolf did kill your family." Feeling relief, I struggled to suppress my tears. My emotions went wild. "It wasn't your fault," Carol added. Reassuring me, Patrick kissed my temple. "I told you, babe." Carol walked toward her purse. "But there's only one thing." "What?" I asked. Veering from polite host to wicked competitor, Carol confronted me. "One of us is the werewolf." A deathly quiet overtook the room, the entire house. No one said a word, not a sliver of a smirk on any of their attractive faces. I didn't know whether to laugh or cringe or hell, even shiver. I looked over at Patrick. I don't understand. What the fuck? Nah, it's cool, Patrick replied. She's serious. Through the confusion, I couldn't respond. Couldn't do anything except just stand there. I did a little investigating, Carol said. She reached inside her purse. None of us had an alibi for that night. I stepped toward her. But how do you know someone is the werewolf? The sight of Carol pulling out a pistol made me stop dead in my tracks. The weapon was old but in mint condition. A real Colt .45 revolver. One fully capable of taking out all 7 of us. Oh shit, I yelled. No one else looked surprised. They didn't even flinch. And deep in my unsettled gut, I realized they expected the gun. You're fine, Ashley, Carol said in a cool voice. She placed the gun right next to her purse. There's already silver bullets in it. So what? I struggled to say through the shivers. You're just gonna shoot whoever changes? Carol's face took on a new layer of intensity. A Southern belle gone mad. Exactly, she said. I scanned the scene for help, but like a morbid Greek chorus, everyone wore the same somber expressions. Even Patrick. His green eyes now looked darker, hazier, as if the party's sudden shift had subdued his soul. But this is crazy, I said. Supportive, Patrick grabbed my hand. You'll be safe, babe. Unless she's the werewolf, Becky blurted out with glee. I wanted to call her an ugly bitch, but I didn't. Not when everyone kept staring at me. Patrick glared at Becky. That could be any one of us. Annoyed, Becky pointed at me. Well, she's the one who survived. I'd put my money on her. And what if it's you, huh? Patrick yelled. What if you killed her family? His burst of a response silenced Becky, but it didn't stop those harsh stares stuck on us. Look, let's just calm down, Carol said. She strolled up next to Roy. We'll just wait and see. She looked toward the windows. Even with the blinds blanketing the darkness, I could tell nighttime was upon us. I could feel it. Once the full moon's at its peak, we'll open the blinds, Carol continued. She confronted me. Then we'll see the werewolf, Ashley. Just like you did. Trembling, I backed away. No, we need to go, But Patrick held me there. Patrick, I said. He looked into my eyes. You need to see, Ashley. I struggled to pull away but had no chance at escaping his staunch grip.
No.
Let go of me. Ashley, please. His emerald eyes begged me to stay. They made me a prisoner to the party. You need the closure, Patrick told me in a gentle tone. You can't keep running away. I looked at everyone else. Carol's clique was cooler than ever. Each and every one of them showed no weakness, no fear. Tonight, everyone will believe you. Ash, Patrick said. You don't have to be afraid. I looked back at him. They'll believe you, he said, just like I do. Carol clapped, grabbing everyone's attention. All right, I think it's time. Will you do the honors, Becky? Staying close to Patrick, I watched Becky step toward the first window. A dread rather than anticipation built up inside me. Roy grabbed a hold of Carol's hand. Wait, do we have to do it right now? He asked, unease piercing through his confidence. Annoyed, Carol pulled away from him. Yeah. With subtle panic, Roy snatched Becky's arm. Hey, just wait a fucking essay. Frank gave him a weird look. Dude, what's wrong? Like a defensive animal, Roy staggered back toward the hallway. A defiant glare overtook his handsome face. Shit, nothing, all right? I just think we should wait until later. Carol watched him with nothing but sheer suspicion. Why? The full moon's already out, dumbass. Goddamn it, Carol. Roy shouted. Just fucking listen to me. Scoffing, Carol pushed Becky over toward the window. Nah, fuck that. I watched Becky stop in front of the window. Clear unease made her hesitate, and I couldn't blame her. Look, I just want us to be safe, Roy said to Carol, his voice featuring more rage than concern. I felt Patrick wrap his arm around me. What are you so afraid of, Roy? Patrick hurled at him. Startled, everyone looked at my boyfriend, shocked to hear him challenge one of Stanwyk's prize jocks. Roy glowered. Hey, you and your creepy-ass girlfriend can shut the fuck up. Jean pushed Frank over toward Roy. I don't need y'all creeps accusing me of shit. Roy continued. My tower of anxiety grew even higher. Hey, leave her alone, asshole. Patrick yelled at Roy. Trying to play peacemaker, Frank grabbed Roy's arm. Dude, chill. Roy broke away from him. Nah, man, fuck that. He went for the gun. I ain't doing this shit. Concerned, Carol rushed toward him. Roy's glare latched onto me, especially with that crazy bitch. Motherfucker, Patrick yelled. He lunged at Roy, but I held him back. All the while, the anger boiled up inside me. But no matter what, I couldn't unleash it. I couldn't let my inner beast out. Rather than exposing the fury within, I could only stay silent in Patrick's arms. Right before Roy grabbed the gun, Carol snatched his wrist. What the hell's wrong with you? She shouted. Amidst their struggle, I saw Jean shove Frank toward them once more. Stop, Carol, Roy yelled. Like a guard restraining an asylum inmate, Frank ambushed Roy, grabbed both his arms. Stop, man, Frank pleaded. Carol glared at Becky. Becky hadn't moved this whole time, too scared to raise the blinds. Open the blinds, Carol demanded. Carol's voice forced Becky out of her fearful state. Okay, she cried. With a trembling hand, Becky reached toward the lift cord. Nervous, I looked at Patrick, but his stoic calmness failed to soothe me.
No.
Roy screamed at Becky. Frank struggled to hold him in place. God damn it, Roy. Be careful, the concerned Jean shouted at Frank. Becky grabbed the cord. With a scratchy snarl, Roy shoved Frank across the room. Frank, Jean cried. Startled, Becky collapsed back against the wall. A scared mess who damn sure wasn't gonna open those blinds now. In a terrifying display of strength, Roy turned and bolted for the hallway. His movements so manic, his howls murky and unsettling. My stomach sank to the floor. The noises harkened me back to past trauma, back to the werewolf's wails, back to my family's tortured screams. What the fuck? Carol yelled. Jean helped Frank off the ground. Oh God, are you okay? She said, concerned. Then Roy's animalistic cries rang through the house. Nothing but his howls and snarls hit us on a horrifying loop. Acting on simultaneous courage and stupidity, Frank snatched the gun. Jean reached toward him. Frank, just stay here, Frank said. He ran toward the hallway, straight toward another harrowing howl. What the hell are you doing? Carol cried after him. Within seconds, Frank had disappeared into the upper-class jungle. The snarling and Frank's frenetic footsteps all we could hear. Frank, Jean yelled. She stepped toward the hallway. Carol restrained her. No, don't. Frank, come back, Jean shouted. Like a timid soldier, I did my best to stagger off toward the window, further away from those sounds. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Becky slouch to the ground. She covered her ears in a pathetic attempt to quash those nocturnal howls. Patrick looked toward me, worried. Ashley, a sudden scream surrounded us. A human scream.
No.
Frank, Jean yelled. Acting off adrenaline, she pushed Carol away and followed her boyfriend's cries. Carol pulled Becky off the ground. Carol's intense blue eyes zeroed in on me. "Come on." Patrick grabbed a hold of my hand. Together, we followed after two preps, Patrick and I lagging behind in this long, dark hallway. By now, Frank's screams had faded off into an unnerving silence. All I could hear was footsteps and the occasional guttural growl. Then a loud thud echoed toward us. I jumped upon hearing it, and I could feel Patrick do the same. Up ahead, I saw Carol drag Becky through an open door on the left. "Come on, Ashley," I heard Carol shout. At the open doorway, I felt Patrick let go of me. "Patrick," I cried. Turning, I caught a brief glimpse of his uneasy face. "Babe," I started. Carol's groomed hand yanked me inside. I stumbled inside the study. A large desk sat in the center of the room. Several antique bookshelves lined up against the wall, all of them crammed with hardbacks and more cherished photos of Carol Lane. A huge window overlooked Lake Douglas. The blinds were lifted, revealing a glorious full moon shining upon us. Its beams so bright, the remnants strayed into the hallway. I stopped at the desk, right by Becky and Carol. Near the window, I saw Jean crying over a bloodied body. Frank was sprawled out like a red snow angel. Crimson ran all along his face and torn t-shirt. Frank the victim of a most brutal attack. The revolver laid a few feet away. Silver bullets and all. "Oh God!" Becky shouted. "He's dead." Horrified, I turned toward the door. In desperate search of Patrick, Carol snatched my arm in a death grip. "Ashley, look out!" Like a cheesy horror sound effect, a howl roared to life right behind me. One more befitting monster mash than an American werewolf in London. Whirling around, I saw a creature rise up behind the desk. Roy had transformed. His face replaced by pointy ears, a long snout, spurts of thick black fur, and two hungry red eyes. Snarling, he lunged at me. I screamed and tumbled to the ground, right by Frank's dead body. Another corny howl pierced my ears. Scared shitless, I reached for the gun. Until I got a closer look at this teenage lycanthrope, Roy still had on his flawless name-brand t-shirt and jeans. His muscular arms and legs completely unscathed by excessive hair. Roy's howling shifted from campy spookiness to howling laughter. Then more laughing surrounded me, and I saw now everyone was chuckling and pointing at me. Carol, Jean, Becky, even Frank sat up, the fake blood unable to drown out his mean-spirited cackle. "Oh shit, we got her," Jean cried out. Like an invisible force, the heavy laughter combined with the mask's narrow eye sockets made Roy stagger against the desk. "Who?" he yelled. "That bitch got scared quick." I sat there on the verge of tears, my self-conscious soul on the verge of suicide. The hurt sunk into my flesh like sharp hooks. I couldn't say anything. Carol pulled Jean off the ground. Frank, too dominated by drunken amusement to even stand on his own. "Well," Carol began, trying to control her sadistic laughter. She pointed over at Roy. "There's your werewolf, Ashley." Leaving his mask on, Roy raised his arms and lumbered toward me. His act about as creepy as an intoxicated straggler leaving a Halloween party. His howls now more obnoxious than ever. I cringed at the silly sight. "The girl who cried wolf," Jean quipped. "Indeed," Carol replied. Chuckling, Becky walked over toward the window. A closer glance at the full moon. "Y'all got her good," she said to an audience of none. Still reeling from the scare, I crawled back toward the door. I realized teardrops were sliding down my face, and like always, I couldn't fight back. I really was gonna weep like a scared child in front of the cool kids. The gang's giggling only grew louder. A laugh track well off the rails. A live studio audience for my pitiful state. With obnoxious glory, Carol pointed right at me. "Hey y'all, she just saw another wolf." "Looks like it," Frank quipped. A booming snarl ended their laughter real quick. Now fear latched into all of them. Outright terror. Everyone watched the beast lunge into the study. A muscular werewolf walking on its furry hind legs. The creature's brown fur was brisk and spiky, its ears long and slender, just like the monster's intimidating snout. In the room, the werewolf flashed us a smile of razor-sharp teeth, its eyes redder than the fake blood scattered across Frank's body. Only tattered clothes were stuck to the werewolf's army of fur, and like huge retractable blades, eager claws extended out of its hands. I recognized those hipster clothes, and even from here, I could tell the creature was exactly my height. Panicking, Roy grabbed Carol. "Oh, fuck!" His muffled voice yelled through the mask. Before Carol could scream, one quick swipe from the creature declared a double decapitation. Carol and Roy's heads tumbled to the ground. Their severed necks erupted like volcanoes of dark red gore. Roy's dying eyes looked on at me. Sticky blood covered the mask's cheap fur, the plastic ears now crooked and bent. His mask a pathetic counterpart to the real thing standing before us. I watched the other teens scream in horror, and for once, I was glad my self-doubt kept me from taking action, especially since it kept me from helping these assholes. Right now, I was one entertained audience. There was Frank reaching for the Colt .45. Only the werewolf's bare foot splattered Frank's head into a busted jack-o'-lantern of gooey flesh. Screaming, Jean and Becky rushed toward the door. The werewolf's bellowing snarl ushered them into a frenzied panic. Both girls kept stumbling into one another, their attempt at escape so sloppy. "Get out of my way, bitch!" Jean yelled. She pushed Becky back, straight into the clutches of the creature. Becky cried out, her squeaky scream silenced once the werewolf jammed its paw straight down her throat. Blood sprayed across the monster's hungry face. It retrieved its paw in a quick flourish, yanking out all sorts of intestines. A goodie bag of Becky's organs. Becky's corpse hit the floor, her mouth agape in a huge oval, a wide enough opening for a red river to come rushing out. Right when Jean reached the open door, the werewolf snagged her back in. Its tight grip sunk straight into her fragile flesh. "No!" she cried. The monster turned her around. A brief taunt of deep breaths and sloppy saliva hit Jean's face. She cringed in helpless fear. She knew she was fucked, and all she could do was scream and scream again. The werewolf went to town on her vulnerable face. A machine of chomping ensued, the monster's mouth quicker and messier than a blender. Jean's screams died even as remnants of her mouth kept twitching, her flesh an all-you-can-eat buffet devoured in mere seconds. As the werewolf finished literally defacing my classmate, I reached out and grabbed the gun. I staggered to my feet. Through the tears, my gaze strayed toward the window. The lift cord for the blinds was well within reach. Victorious, the monster threw down Jean's body. She landed with a splat near all the others, now all their blood intertwined. The 5 bodies laying side by side in a prep cemetery. I stared at the werewolf. Deep down, I knew I'd never seen it before. This wasn't the monster that killed my family. Or at least, I didn't think it was. My trembling hand did its damnedest to hold the gun in a tight grip. "Patrick!" I yelled out, my tone strong and steady for once. Drawn to my voice, the creature confronted me. Even behind the terrifying exterior, I knew Patrick recognized me. His eyes always gave away his emotions, even when they were red instead of green. Breathing heavy, Patrick stepped toward me. His ominous footsteps splashed through multiple red puddles. I pointed the gun right at him. But who was I kidding? Patrick didn't even flinch, much less slow down. He knew I couldn't pull the trigger. I took a deep breath and wiped away my tears. "I love you," I said to him. Reaching out, I pulled the cord. Like a dropped curtain, the blinds whisked straight down. The full moon was blanketed. Through the darkness, I heard Patrick howl in pain, heard his anguished cries. Terrified by the noises, I stumbled toward the desk. I struggled before finally turning on a lamp. There was Patrick cowering a few feet away, weakened yet alive, and in human form. Exhausted by the transformation, Patrick looked at me with those green eyes. Somehow, he now looked even sexier, more radiant. I guess those revealing ripped clothes may have helped. "Patrick!" I yelled in excitement. I dropped the gun and rushed toward him. "Babe," he said. A weak smile crossed his lips. I hugged him close. An embrace for the ages. "Oh my God, I'm glad you're okay." Amused, Patrick looked at me. "You ain't hugged me like that in a long time." I blushed, then struggled to tell him what needed to be told. "Look, I need to tell you, Dash." Still smiling, Patrick traced his smooth hand along my face. "I already know, babe." Shockwaves rushed through me. "What?" "I guess we, both have our little secrets." Patrick's grin remained. Yet it wasn't taunting or vile but comforting. Supportive like he always was. "I don't know," I finally said. "I've never told anyone." "And you don't need to," Patrick responded. He stroked my hair. "I know you killed them. I know you did it, Ash." And he was right. The whole town was right. The ticking teenage time bomb that was Ashley Nelson had finally exploded. A Jodi Arias meltdown led to me massacring my entire family. Sure, I tried to suppress those painful memories, and in some ways, maybe my werewolf story was true. Maybe Patrick had given me a helping hand that night, but amidst the immense anger, I couldn't remember much. Honest. All I did was give Patrick a knowing smile. His secret was safe with me, and mine with him. "You don't have to tell me shit, babe," Patrick said in that deep, sexy voice. Smirking, he leaned in closer, a rebellious twinkle in those emerald eyes. "I know what it's like to get frustrated, to fight back. Like tonight?" I quipped. Patrick chuckled. "Hey, I did that for you." He motioned toward the bodies surrounding us like scattered rice and bouquets of flowers at a wedding. I knew what they were gonna do. He caressed my face. His mere touch melted my heart. "I couldn't let them hurt you, Ash. You know I couldn't." My smile grew even wider. No one had ever stuck up for me like that. Not even myself. And now I had a werewolf on my side. "I struggled with the same issues, babe," Patrick went on. "I know." Patrick's eyes pierced into mine. "And I know what can help." Reflective, I looked back toward the big window, where the full moon awaited us. "If you just let me do one bite, you'll be like me," he said. "You'll be confident, Dash." Shushing him, I put a finger to Patrick's lips, flashed him my own sly smile. "You don't have to say no more." In that moment, I knew I'd found my werewolf soulmate, and now I wanted to join. After all, I always had a hard time saying no. So why stop now? Fourth story. I thought he was a nice guy, but then we were alone. The full worm moon. The Algonquins used to call Ontario their home before it was discovered. Now the land and so many of its names have been repurposed by those who think that stealing an idea makes them the best people to teach those who have been robbed. But why a worm moon? I asked Hugh. He reached out and tucked a lock of hair behind my ear. I leaned into it because I know that he likes it, the same way that he likes explaining things as though I didn't already know. The earth is finally soft enough to herald the oncoming spring. Things that were dead will be alive again, he whispered, looking up at the pitch-black sky. The worms know this before everyone, because we all end up as the greatest delicacy a worm can crave. His face was alabaster in the moonlight. Hugh licked his lips. Is that why you wanted a midnight picnic? I asked with half a smile. He huffed. It's because we're seeing something beautiful, Olivia. In 2 weeks, the greatest celestial dance will cause a solar eclipse dash, which is why there's a lunar eclipse tonight. At the full moon, I finished dreamily. Hugh bared his teeth. Is there a reason you needed to interrupt my story, Olivia? I turned away, suddenly uncomfortable. I was just making conversation, Hugh. Look, it's getting late, and dash. He wrapped a hand around the back of my neck, and I froze as chills ran up and down my spine. No one around but the two of us, he whispered. I licked my lips. It's very private. No one around, Hugh whispered as he lowered his mouth to my shoulder. Did you know that a wolf can eat 4.217 pounds in a day? Pulling aside my cardigan, he nibbled at my skin. I shuddered. Somehow, he seemed paler as the moon grew brighter. It was unnerving, but the way his tongue touched my skin was painful. Ow. Hugh, what are you doing to my shoulder? That's OUCH. Fuck. Hugh, what the dash? Then he pulled back, and it wasn't Hugh. Or, more horrifyingly, it was him. Sort of. Those same pinkish eyes looked back at me beneath facial hair that had sprouted up to his lashes. His long face, always gaunt, was now freakishly out of proportion with a jaw that fell to the middle of his chest, revealing long, sharp, yellow teeth. I froze in utter horror as the wolf pressed his claws into my arms. He was on top of me before I could resist, his nose now extended into a lupin snout that sniffed hungrily at my neck. I was pinned. The terror had overwhelmed me so quickly that the fight was over before I could understand what was happening. I stared up at the beast, unable to move, unable to process the fact that I was about to experience my final sensory input before the lights went out. Then it got darker. Just slightly, but enough to notice. Orwu. The wolf whined. Then he relaxed his grip. Swaying back and forth, he felt lighter, weaker. His face began to melt back into hues. Not entirely, but sufficient to see the man behind the wolf. He lowered his head, and then I saw it. A partial lunar eclipse. The edge of the moon was weak as it fought against the Earth's shadow. What had been a bright picnic now got dimmer as the moon appeared lopsided. The Hugh wolf stayed on top of me, but he wavered. That was enough. I reached for my deepest strategy and used the most cunning move available in a pinch. I need Hugh in the balls. I was running while Hugh was still howling at the moon, his wails of agony rippling across an empty field that ensured we were totally alone. Fortunately, I had driven us here. Hugh seemed worried about driving, explaining that he had a hard time controlling a car in the full moonlight. I would kick myself for missing that sign, but who takes such a red flag seriously? I screeched my car into the driveway, stumbled out, and locked the front door behind me before taking a breath. Then I triple-checked every door and window lock, pulled down every shade, grabbed my chef's knife, and crawled into the corner of my closet. What was I going to do? Call the cops on a werewolf? No, the best thing to do was entrench myself in the darkest shadows from the moon, waiting until morning before facing a world that I would never see the same way again. I finally allowed myself to breathe. The fear and intensity of the moment hadn't allowed me to process what was going on. How am I supposed to categorize a werewolf? I shook my head. The important thing was that I was safe. Warmth spread through me, tingling my skin. I scratched my shoulder. Would anyone believe me? I had no proof of what happened. Would this come back to haunt me at the next full moon? My head spun as I scratched harder. Come to think of it, there was no realistic way out of this. No one capable of helping me would believe that Hugh was a werewolf. I scratched harder still, my shoulder becoming raw, as I realized a fundamental truth. The fact that people believe werewolves are a myth is a very strong argument that every werewolf encounter has been fatal. The panic came back full bore as my skin felt like it was breaking out in hives of anxiety. Had I really escaped it all? Then I looked down at the patch of skin on my shoulder I'd been scratching. The one Hugh had tickled with his teeth. The one with a prominent bite mark firmly outlined in my flesh. Panic shot through me as a patch of moonlight peeked through the blinds over my windows and crept beneath my closet door. I suddenly felt hungry. Oh, so hungry. I knew that I would lose myself if I embraced the moonlight, but I can feel its call. So I wrote this and posted it with the strength I have. I hope I live until tomorrow. Fifth story. The Forest Man. I believe I have discovered a new cryptid, or well, me and my younger brother. It was terrifying even if the first encounter was for literal seconds. We were taking out the trash together one night during the summer. My brother wanted me to come with him because there have been animals going missing lately, and our parents assume it's been coyotes. We went out to take it, and I was looking out at the forest line in our backyard. If it wasn't for the back porch light, I wouldn't have seen the thing. It was running straight at us. It was about 6 feet tall, humanoid, and slightly hunched over with its legs spread out. So were its arms. I would have thought it was an actual naked person if it wasn't for the fact it had no genitals, hair, body hair, or a face. It was completely featureless. Its skin looked like a whitish pink. I thought I was going insane. I asked my brother if he saw it. He looked over and immediately sprinted to the house and followed behind, and I could hear the thing's feet smack against the hard ground as it moved faster to catch one of us. Luckily, we had a head start and got inside. We looked out the window to see if it was still there, but it was gone, and it was like the thing disappeared the second it realized it wasn't getting to us. Our parents asked us what's wrong. We're both teenagers and knew neither of them would believe a word of, so we lied. We said that we heard howling and got scared. We then both went to our room and questioned one another on what we think we saw. I first said on 3 we should say the color of the thing's skin. We counted to 3 and both said pink, and both of our faces went pale. We knew we both weren't just seeing things. We had no proof. We had no other witness to it. It was just the two of us knowing that there was something roaming the woods behind our house. More animals have gone missing in our neighborhood, some of our own animals too. So far it has gotten 4 of our cats and 2 of our chickens. I never found the cats, but it did leave the chickens in the coop we had him in. It was like it was sending a message. The chicken's limbs were ripped off, and then it was ripped in half. There was blood everywhere. I sometimes feel like it stalks me in the woods. I never go near them at night, but I do sometimes go in them during the day. It feels like there's constantly something over my shoulder. Sometimes I hear fallen beaches break like something heavy stepped on it. I'll find limbs placed weirdly like in stacks. I have no idea what it is. All I know is that I will figure it out. If anyone has heard of something like this, please tell me.